Hello YouTube, and today we're doing the ultimate comparison between the Voltric Z Force 2 and the Lindan Force. Let's get it!
Yeah. Yeah. Woo! Yeah. Zone out. I zoned out. Listen to the word. Zone out. I'm dead to this world. Zone out. Away from the noise. Zone out. Zone. Yeah, I zoned out. Listen to the word. Zone out. I'm dead to this world. Zone out. Away from the noise. I sow seeds and I get big trees. Troubles may come, but I get victories. Life's easy cause he's in me. Temptations try to tease me, but he's freed me with his righteous right hand. I'm living in his will and his perfect plan. Sin can't dominate me. He says I'm holy. I hear and I understand.
So, first of all, let me give a shout out to my sponsor, Long Tang. They're an authorised badminton dealer in Hong Kong that sells badminton stuff at a much lower price than basically any other place. Personally, I wasn't able to find any other place where you can buy legitimate, authentic YONEX products at a lower price than them. They've been in business for like over 30 years, so they have loads and loads of experience. They offer stringing services too, and it's actually great. Their shop has been newly refurbished and they have loads and loads of items. However, on their website they don't have every single thing that they stock. So that means if you want a particular product and it's not on their website, then simply scroll down to the bottom of their web page where you will find an email address so you can message them and request for the item that you want. The Voltric Z Force 2 comes in the standard Voltric case, whereas the Voltric Lindan Force comes in like a customized Lindan edition of the Voltric case, with like the 5 stars, the Lindan logo, and generally more like a glossy golden look. So both of these rackets are actually very similar. They're both in the Voltric series, which means they're head heavy. They're also both in the Lindan exclusive range at the moment, but the Voltric Z Force 2 will have like a white or the orange colorway if you're finding it from that range. So, on the frame of the Lindan Force, you can see there's like grommets sticking out on the side, much like the older conventional models, whereas on the Voltric Z Force 2, the grommets are tucked in. In the Voltric Z Force 2 advertisement, it's advertised that this helps to reduce air resistance to help you give a faster and more stable swing. So the fact that they brought out the grommets once again on the Voltric Lindan Force doesn't really make sense, and it's kind of like a downgrade. The ambassador for the Lindan Force is obviously Lindan, and Lindan fanboys will really want this racket. But the thing is, as much as they would like to use Lindan's racket, this isn't actually his racket in competition. If you zoom into Lindan's racket during tournaments and stuff like that, you can see that on the side of the racket, the grommets are tucked in, very much like the Voltric Z Force 2. So Lindan is actually using a racket that is closer to the Voltric Z Force 2 than the Lindan Force. So, on the Lindan Force, the shaft is slightly thinner and slightly more flexible than the Voltric Z Force 2. This means that the Voltric Lindan Force is slightly more user-friendly in terms of getting power than the Voltric Z Force 2, because there's that slight whip to it and it can help generate power. But it also means that there's a slight loss of control, because the stiffer the shaft, the more control you get. The Voltric Z Force 2 actually has an incredibly thin shaft, so I'm actually so surprised that they managed to make it even thinner on the Lindan Force. The Voltric Z Force 2 has a slightly smaller head than the Lindan Force. But in my opinion, the Voltric Z Force 2 has a higher sweet spot to frame size ratio than the Lindan Force. But if you were to compare these two rackets side to side, you can see the sweet spots are actually very similar. So in this case, I would recommend the Voltric Z Force 2 because it has a slightly smaller frame with less air resistance, but the same size sweet spot as the Lindan Force. The Voltric Z Force 2 comes in a matte finish, which tends to be like slightly more durable than the glossy finishes of like the Lindan Force. Both of these rackets have plates on the top of the rackets to add an extra weight for the head heavy balance. You can see on the shaft of the Lindan Force that the racket is long size. Indeed, it's a tiny bit more long than the Voltric Z Force 2, but it's almost unnoticeable. The Voltric Z Force 2 though has one issue. Because the Voltric Z Force 2 has a smaller head size than most rackets, there is a slight learning curve to get used to it. But once you get used to the racket, it's actually amazing. You won't find some issues with it. But of course, when you're getting used to both of these rackets, you'll experience more frame hits on the Voltric Z Force 2 than the Lindan Force. The Voltric Z Force 2 is released for Lee Chongwei during the All England events back in 2014, whereas the Lindan Force is released for Lindan's use in the 2016 Rio Olympics. Both of these rackets have very solid and punchy feelings when you hit with it, which gives you good power and control generally. But because both of these rackets are in the Voltric series, it's not like the best for drives and quick responses in defense and stuff. Both of these rackets are actually produced to be singles rackets, but you can use them for doubles if you have a very strong technique, and also if you get the 4U model. You can see like Gabby Adcock and also Chris Adcock use it in mixed doubles, which proves that this racket is also good for it. This Lindan Force is the 4U edition, whereas the Voltric Z Force 2 is the 3U edition. The 3U edition is slightly more heavy than the 4U edition, which means that you get less handling but a bit more power on the 3U. Smashes with these two rackets are absolutely incredible. There's not a whole lot of differences between these two, so don't expect like, oh, one racket to have better smashes than the other. Deceptive shots are slightly more easier to play on the Voltric Z Force 2 because it feels a bit more like controlled, and you can like slice and brush those shuttles easier. In my opinion, I actually prefer the Voltric Z Force 2 than the Lindan Force for like a whole load of reasons. The first reason is I actually prefer singles more than doubles, so the 3U Voltric Z Force 2 works better for me. Number 2. The slightly stiffer shaft of the Voltric Z Force 2 gives a bit more control for me to play those deceptive shots and down the line smashes. And number 3, because the Voltric Z Force 2 has a smaller frame, it feels a lot more aerodynamic and has more of a punchy power to it. Let me give you an analogy. If you were to hit someone, would you rather slap them with an open palm or punch them like that to get more effect? Of course you would punch them with the fist closed because it's more concentrated. Much like the Voltric Z Force 2. The smaller the frame, the more it's closer to the fist, whereas the Lindan Force is like an open palm. Number 4. I actually prefer matte finishes over glossy finishes because matte finishes just tend to last longer. Number 5. The Voltric Z Force 2 seems like a more high-tech, a more developed racket than the Voltric Lindan Force. The Voltric Z Force 2 has tucked-in grommets, very much like the racket that Lindan is using in competitions right now, whereas the Voltric Lindan Force has sticking out grommets, which doesn't really make sense because it's like conventional old models. It has more air resistance, and the shaft is also more flexible, which makes it seem like a more beginner racket than the Voltric Z Force 2. But it's not necessarily true because you see like very good players also using this one. The recommended string tension of the Voltric Z Force 2, this is a 3U model, is 20 to 28 pounds of tension, whereas on the 4U model of the Lindan Force is 20 to 27 pounds of tension. The slightly lower range on the Voltric Lindan Force may be due to the fact that it's 4U and not 3U, but it also might be the build quality and the material used in this racket compared to the Voltric Z Force 2. Both of these rackets are very offensive rackets. So if you're a type of player to smash a lot and dominate like in rallies with smashes and like overhead shots, then both of these rackets are great, but I would personally recommend to you the Voltric Z Force 2 over the Lindan Force. If you want me to make another comparison, simply get this video to 100 likes and comment a suggestion below. Also, if you're using either of these rackets, you have to make sure you have a very strong technique in your defense. Because if you can't maneuver them to defend the shot, then you can't convert the chances into attack. They're slightly more difficult to handle than the slightly more even rackets such as the Dura Z Strike, which is still head heavy but not as head heavy, if you know what I mean. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe and turn on my channel. Bye bye!